Over 400,000 pounds of canned vegetables have been recalled in less than 12 months. They passed the scanners, slipped through inspections, and made it to your local shelf. The seal looked fine. The price felt comforting, but inside, a silent failure nobody warned you about. Some of these cans came from facilities flagged for contamination years ago, still operating, still supplying. Others were packed under private labels that hide their true origin, and yet week after week they keep ending up in school lunches, nursing home pantries, and emergency food kits across the country. There are cracks in the system, in regulation, in sourcing, in the corporate shell game that swaps logos but never changes what's inside. Today we're pulling back the curtain. We'll expose 5 names you need to stop buying immediately and show you 2 rare brands that still deserve a spot in your home. This is about your food, your body, your trust, and what's really behind that cheap green label. Del Monte. Nearly 200,000 cans of green beans. That's how many had to be recalled just this year, not because of spoilage or bad labeling, but because of something far more dangerous: foreign material contamination. Translation: shards of plastic, fragments of rubber, maybe even bits of metal sealed inside a product, meant to go straight into your mouth. These weren't old stock. These weren't dented rejects. These were fresh, on-shelf, fully approved cans, shipped to over 20 states and sold under a name people associate with health and simplicity: Good and Gather. But what no one saw on that label was the actual manufacturer. That quiet name behind the curtain: Del Monte. For years, Del Monte has been supplying canned produce across America. But what's rarely mentioned is how often that supply chain cuts corners. Factory lines run faster, inspections go lighter, and in that chaos, contamination finds a way in. When you process food in bulk, one stray fragment from a cracked machine part, a faulty seal, or a missed cleaning cycle can slip past unnoticed. But once it's inside, it's waiting for someone to trust it. That someone could be a child, a senior on heart medication, a diabetic patient whose digestion can't handle another shock to the system. For those with fragile health, even a small object swallowed the wrong way could trigger internal bleeding, bowel obstruction, or worse. And unlike with spoiled food, there's no smell to warn you, no sign of danger. Just one bite and it's too late. And what does Del Monte say? Nothing. Because technically it wasn't their name on the label. The recall notice came from Target. But the beans? The packing line. The facility that was all Del Monte. They stay silent in the background, protected by a system that lets them manufacture under dozens of aliases and walk away clean when something goes wrong. And here's the bigger issue: this isn't their first time. Past recalls have flagged their corn for underprocessing, meaning bacteria like Clostridium botulinum could survive inside the can. That's the same bacteria that causes botulism, a potentially fatal condition. Del Monte's history is dotted with these close calls, but in a food system, this large, even close calls can be catastrophic. The truth is, this can of beans was a trap. Clean label, cheap price, hidden danger. It could have ended up in your pantry, in your soup, on your loved one's dinner plate, and there would have been no way to know until the damage was done. This is why Del Monte, whether showing their face or hiding behind private labels, cannot be trusted. The cost of convenience in this case is paid in risk. And it's paid by you, not them. Coming up, another brand that sent swollen, pressurized cans to store shelves. Internal gas buildup, burst seams, and the threat of bacterial poisoning. And yes, people still bought them. Stay tuned. Number 2, Goya Foods. You walk down the bean aisle, spot the red Goya label, and grab a can without thinking twice. But what if that simple habit was laced with silent risk? Behind the trusted brand, a wave of spoiled, swollen, and leaking cans made it into American homes, unnoticed, unannounced, and undetected for far too long. This wasn't cosmetic damage. These were structural failures, cans that bulged, unnaturally hissed when opened, or oozed liquid along the seams. The kind of warning signs that make your gut clench before your stomach ever gets involved. Swollen cans aren't just ugly, they're dangerous. That expansion signals internal gas buildup, often the result of microbial activity, and possibly the growth of pathogens like Clostridium botulinum. If that name rings a bell, it should. It's the same bacteria responsible for botulism, a rare but life-threatening illness that can paralyze muscles, impair breathing, and land people in intensive care for weeks. Most people don't associate canned beans with biohazards, and that's exactly what makes this so terrifying. No mold on top, no strange smell, just a pop of pore and a ticking time bomb in the form of a dinner side dish. What's worse, these compromised cans didn't just end up in boutique stores. They were shipped out nationwide, sent to school districts, low-income food banks, elderly care kitchens, and everyday grocery chains across dozens of states. In other words, the very people who rely most on cheap, long-lasting pantry staples. The ones with no garden in the backyard, no Whole Foods down the road were the most exposed. The problem goes beyond spoilage. It cuts straight through corporate strategy. Brands like Goya rely on mass distribution, and in that scale lies the danger. A lapse in sterilization, a missed inspection, a pressure change during shipping. These are not theoretical risks, they're mechanical failures waiting to happen in a supply chain designed for speed, not safety. And what about accountability? When these bloated cans were finally pulled, the recall was issued under the name of the contracted packer, not Goya itself. So if you're a regular shopper, if you're scanning labels in a rush, you might never realize the same factory problems could still be tied to the red cans in your pantry. That's how the system works. The brand survives, the consumer absorbs the risk. And for people with underlying health conditions, cardiac issues, compromised immunity, digestive sensitivities, just one misstep can spiral fast. A strange tingling in the mouth, a wave of dizziness, a trip to the ER no one saw coming. Most incidents never make the news. Most cans never get tested. Most brands never face questions, because all it takes is one clean batch to reset the trust. But the danger never left. It just hid behind the next shipment. So ask yourself, what's peace of mind really worth? If that red label still makes you feel safe, maybe it's time to look closer, because sometimes the thing that looks the most familiar is the thing you should be watching most closely. Next up, a lesser-known brand with a shocking history of undeclared allergens and mislabeling. The name might sound local and harmless, but what it hides could put millions at risk. Number 3, Yellowstone. Your pantry might look harmless, but one innocuous can just turn into a weapon. Picture this: a baked bean can, sitting quietly among others until inspectors discovered it held a hidden threat. The issue: the Yellowstone brown sugar molasses. Baked beans were recalled because they contained undeclared soy and allergen that the label never mentioned. That means anyone allergic to soy could be exposed to a life-threatening reaction completely blind to it. The company behind it, Veggies Food Group, pulled more than 4,500 cases sold across 23 states. Chains like Walmart, Meijer, Safeway, and other big names were part of the distribution network. Consumers were told to check cans with best if used. By February 17, 2028 markings, the recall was labeled Class 1 by regulators, the highest risk level. In short, this was no minor labeling error. This is dangerous chemical deception. Think for a moment about every rented home, every food pantry, every budget meal, where a can of beans is considered safe. Now imagine that safety mask pulled off. Someone with a soy allergy cracks open that can. They might feel wheezing, swelling lips, hives, nausea symptoms that can escalate in minutes. We're not talking mild discomfort. For sensitive individuals, the undeclared soy could trigger anaphylaxis, collapse, or worse. It gets darker when you realize how product lines and branding work. Yellowstone looks like a rustic, wholesome brand, but that label is marketing camouflage. Who's really behind the sourcing allergen protocols, quality control, and how many more cans like this are out there slipping by in blind spots? For large food companies, hiding behind subsidiaries, private labels, third-party packers is common. That creates gaps in tracking, accountability, and consumer protection. Let's talk system leverage. A recall like this affects not just those cans. It shakes trust in labeling in food safety agencies and in your own kitchen. When someone avoids soy scrupulously yet ends up reacting to canned beans, they start questioning everything. And rightly so. What else are they ingesting unknowingly? And consider policy cracks. Food laws require allergen labeling, but enforcement is patchy. Blitz inspections are rare. The recall tells us that violations exist until someone notices. That oversight often occurs because of whistleblowers, random sampling, or consumer complaints, not because companies act on their own to stay safe. For households with someone who's older, asthmatic, or with multiple allergies, the risk here is real. It's not just about taste or spoilage. It's about your loved one choking, gasping for air, or worse, struggling when there's no warning label to guide them. This brand betrayal goes deeper. It's not just a mislabeled ingredient, it's a calculated gamble. In massive production runs, some lines slip through, but some cans get mixed, some labels don't catch the change. For companies, the occasional recall is the cost of doing business, but for you or someone you care about, the cost can be medical trauma. So when you next pass a shelf with Yellowstone on it, pause. Don't let the rustic branding lull you. Don't let the shelf price trick you. That can sitting in your cupboard could be holding a hidden danger. Coming next, we'll dissect another brand you thought was safe, but whose processing failure made a silent enemy out of canned vegetables. Stay alert. Stay with me. Number 4, Lakeside Foods. A quiet can of beet slices slipped past the checkpoints. The label looked harmless, but inside the processing was so flawed that the product was flagged for underprocessing, a core safety failure. That's exactly what happened when Lakeside Foods issued a recall for approximately 3,000 cases of canned, pickled, sliced beets over concerns that some cans were underprocessed and may have harbored Clostridium botulinum. That doesn't mean people got sick. Reportedly, there were no confirmed illnesses, but the risk was undeniable. When a can fails to reach the right internal temperature during processing, spores survive. Those spores can produce toxins that one bite might unleash without warning. The fact that a simple vegetable could carry a pathogen capable of paralytic food poisoning is enough to send chills down your spine. Consider how that can travel from factory to shipper to warehouse to shelf. Every leg of the journey stresses the seal. Heat, cold, vibration all threaten the integrity of a compromised can. A can that was already underprocessed doesn't just carry risk, it becomes a ticking threat. What makes this especially sinister is how rarely these mistakes come to light. Companies recall a few thousand cases, they issue statements, but those are the ones caught. What about the ones never flagged? What about cans sold in low visibility zones, discount racks, shelter pantries, rural markets? They vanish into consumption. No test, no headlines. And check this, the labels affected included multiple store brand aliases. That means you could pick up a can believing it's from a small local brand, not realizing it shared production lines with Lakeside's broader operations. That's the corporate web at work: camouflage dispersion, plausible deniability. For households already stretched, elderly folks immune, compromised kids with sensitivities that kind of hidden danger is magnified, the immune system senses toxins and whispers warning signals, faint vision trouble, weakness, difficulty speaking. But too often those whispers are ignored or misdiagnosed until they grow louder. When food becomes a weapon, when trust is the casualty, that's when we realize the real problem isn't just contamination, it's concealment. It's the fact that companies can sweep under the rug unsafe processes because we rarely demand full transparency. So when you next see canned beets or pickled veggies, don't let natural or gourmet labeling lull you. That may carry a strategic gamble, a compromise made somewhere deep in production to save cost or time. And in an understaffed inspection environment, those gambles too often win. Next, we'll dive into brand number 5. Beans you thought were safe but were sealed with fatal weaknesses. That chapter is coming up, and it hits harder than you expect. Number 5, Faribault Foods. A can that looks perfectly normal, a seal you trust. But the flaw lies in that very seal compromised invisible deadly. That's what regulators discovered in cans of S&W organic black beans and O organic chili beans produced by Faribault Foods. Some cans had hermetic seals that failed, leaks, bloating pressure inside. That's how a can becomes a hidden threat. The recall covered multiple lots. The problem when a seal fails, air and bacteria can creep in. Microbes like Clostridium botulinum begin to produce toxins. And botulism is no minor stomach ache. It's a neurotoxin that can paralyze muscles, shut down breathing, and lead to death if help isn't immediate. Symptoms may hide at first: blurred vision, drooping eyelids, difficulty swallowing until it's already too late. What puzzles many consumers is how such error passes through layers of inspection. You buy a 15-ounce can of black beans. You expect safe ingredients. You expect quality control. Yet, here's a can that leaks and you never hear. That means quality checks either failed or were bypassed. That means corners were cut. That means somewhere along contract packaging, somewhere along distribution safety was traded off for cost. The recall was voluntary, but that doesn't make it minor. The affected cans were distributed across many states from California, Arizona, Texas, to Washington, Utah, Georgia, seen on shelves even in major retail chains like Costco. That means consumers in dozens of areas bought those cans, never realizing a can of beans could harbor a toxin. The recall attempts to shut the door after the horse escaped. Now consider the vulnerable among us elderly people with weaker immune systems, respiratory conditions, or people taking medications. One bad bite, one toxin dose, one hidden failure, and the body may not handle it. Warnings or subtle medical teams may not suspect a can of beans. Cases go unreported. Many victims may never connect their illness to their pantry purchase. The silence is part of the danger. This is more than a faulty seal. It is a failure in accountability. Because Faribault's name is less known in everyday shopping than S&W or O Organic. The risk hides behind an organic label, behind consumer trust in safe and clean brands. That's how companies mask risk, by letting consumers buy into a brand story without seeing its backstage operations. And when a failure surfaces, recall notices appear, but damage is already done. Look deeper. When a brand issues a recall for seal failure, it reveals processes under strain. Packaging lines, supplier quality oversight of contractors, all need to be airtight too. If they aren't, leaks become invasion points, and contamination does its quiet work. A broken seal is not just a flaw, it is a portal for disease. So when you reach for a can of beans, think about the seal. Think about where it was made. Think about whether someone examined the internal integrity. Because one flawed can might end up in your kitchen, in your chili, in your child's meal, and you'd never know. Up next, we shift to brightness brands that pass every test that keep you safe instead of catching your trust in danger. But before that pause, go pull your canned bean collection, inspect them. Imagine what you can no longer trust at face value. Let me know when you're ready for the safe brands section. I'll walk you through 2 cans that might still belong in your home. After all that mess, it's only fair we breathe for a second, because not every can is a ticking time bomb. Among all the warning signs, there are still a few labels you don't have to second guess. A few names that haven't forgotten what trust is supposed to mean. Number 1, Eden Foods. Here's a shocker. The company that's been quietly doing everything right is the one you probably walk past without a second thought. Eden Foods is the only major U.S. brand that has consistently refused to line its cans with BPA or BPS since the late 1990s. Let that sink in. While nearly every other brand waited for outrage lawsuits or bad press to force a change, Eden saw the risk and made the move 2 decades before the rest caught on. No drama, no recalls, just foresight. But it's not just the cans, it's what's inside. Their canned black beans, chickpeas, and kidney beans come with 3 simple ingredients: beans, purified water, and a touch of kombu seaweed. No added salt, no natural flavorings, no preservatives, gums, or stabilizers. Just real food in a real can that won't bleed hormone-disrupting chemicals into your dinner. What really sets Eden apart is what they control. They don't rely on massive co-packing operations hidden behind shell companies. They run their own facilities, they know their growers, and they don't subcontract their safety. That means fewer points of failure, fewer chances for some distant supplier to slip in a cheaper lining, or for a packing plant to overlook a broken seal. Most canned food companies operate like an assembly line of plausible deniability. But Eden works like someone's actually going to eat this. And that changes everything. Their practices aren't perfect, but they're transparent. And in this industry, that's almost rarer than safety itself. You might pay an extra 50 cents for a can. But ask yourself this: would you rather save 2 quarters now, or spend thousands fixing the effects of slow daily exposure to synthetic estrogens and chemical leaching? So if you're trying to rebuild your pantry from the ground up, this is a brand that deserves space on your shelf. It may not scream at you from the aisle with shiny labels or empty slogans, but sometimes the quietest can is the one that won't poison you. Stick around, because the next name on the safe list, you've probably never even noticed it, but it might just be the smartest switch you'll make all year. Number 2, Native Forest. A label that says organic can feel like a shield, but sometimes that shield hides cracks. Native Forest has often claimed that most of its canned vegetables and fruits use BPA-free can linings, or at least low detectable levels, especially in their organic lines. It's a progressive step in an industry where lining with bisphenol A is still common. But in many products is a vague phrase. It leaves open the question which ones still use old linings, which batches slip through testing. Because even a single can lined with BPA or similar compounds can leach chemicals that mimic hormones, putting stress on your endocrine system over months and years. The fact that consumers must play detective reading small print researching statements reveals how little transparency many brands truly offer. Native Forest also markets with organic, non-GMO, no synthetic pesticides claims, which helps comfort consumers. But behind those claims lurk supply chains with multiple links: growers, packers, liners, transporters. A defect at any stage, improper liner formulation, weak seals, subpar linings can reintroduce the very risks a consumer hoped to avoid. Consider this in tests of metal cans from organic brands. Researchers have sometimes detected traces of metals inside the lining cadmium lead using XRF scans. In one case, a can from Native Forest's organic pineapple line revealed metallic residues under close lab analysis. That's rare and underreported, but it's enough to remind us that organic is not an absolute shield. The packaging around the can matters. So when you grab a can of artichoke hearts or bamboo shoots bearing the Native Forest name, remember? The label may omit whether that specific product was tested or whether the lining inside has integrity. That vagueness is the opportunity zone for contamination, leaching, or chemical migration. And in a world where many cans are stored in distasteful ambient conditions, heat, cold, transit stress, those vulnerabilities are magnified. Also, policy gaps allow companies to make claims like BPA-free linings without standard regulation of alternate liners. Some substitutes may carry their own risks like BPS or polymer blends. The regulatory framework for can linings is still catching up, meaning some new liners aren't rigorously tested for long-term exposure. For people already managing sensitivities, thyroid issues, hormonal imbalances, metabolic concerns, exposure from one may tip a delicate balance. And because low-dose chemical exposure doesn't scream danger on day one, cumulative effects over time can quietly degrade health. Native Forest Organic First branding gives a feeling of safety, but it demands vigilance. Because the systems behind the label are complex, the claims partial, and the oversight patchy, its strengths are real, but its gaps are precisely where risk hides. So yes, Native Forest can be safer than many. But when building a pantry that doesn't betray you, safer should be backed by clear proof, not marketing suggestions. Let's move on to the conclusion, where I'll wrap up the full picture and tell you exactly what you should do when you see those cans in your cabinet. So next time you reach for that familiar can on the shelf, stop. Breathe. Look again, because what's inside might not just be corn or beans. It might be residues, rust, or lies you've paid for without knowing. We've uncovered 5 brands that turned convenience into a gamble and only 2 that show signs of doing better. Not perfect, but better. That difference matters when your health, your wallet, and your trust are on the line. You deserve more than cheap tricks and metal cans. You deserve clarity, quality, and control over what enters your body. Check your pantry, check your labels. And if this video made you rethink even one item you've been buying for years, then maybe it's time the food industry starts feeling the pressure from people who've had enough. Because now you know, and once you know, you don't unsee it.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today analyzes made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.